2020 was not a great year by any metric, yet I feel that it was a pretty alright year for gaming. But that's not why we're here. Today, we'll take a look at the worst games released in the past year. For this list, I've looked at the critics' reception of games and chose games that had at least some relevance. So yes, of course there are games that are even worse than those on this list, but they're not noticeable enough for anyone to care. Which may sound harsh, but it is what it is. On to the countdown. At number 10 is the newest game in the Cooking Mama series, named Cookstar. It's far from the worst game out there, but it's somewhat undercooked. It's criticized for being extremely shallow gameplay-wise, lacking detail and just being underwhelming in comparison to previous installments. Not everyone absolutely hated the game though, and there can still be some enjoyment to be found in its well-known gameplay loop. But if you've never played the Cooking Mama game, you're better off not starting from this installment. The game can be found on Nintendo Switch and was supposed to have a PS4 version, but was pulled from the store quickly for a number of controversies. It might become one of the hardest games to find for the PS4. At number 9 is 1971, Project Helios, a turn-based strategy game similar to XCOM style. While not horrible, it's criticized for being relatively uninspired with forgettable characters, lack of appeal, and having very repetitive gameplay. One of the red flags is that it has so little reviews on Steam that it doesn't even have a rating there, even though it was released all the way back in June. It feels like the potential is there, with glimpses of the game's visions shining, but unfortunately is just not well executed and could have benefited from a longer development cycle. At number 8 is a game being marketed as a CRPG that can be played co-op, called The Dark Eye Book of Heroes. Unfortunately, it's a very ugly experience, both graphically and gameplay-wise. Buggy, boring, lack of real story and character progression. It really doesn't do itself many favors. It doesn't feel like a game that was released in 2020 in any aspect whatsoever. There are just so many similar games that are much better at everything than this game, and it's probably not worth anyone's time other than some die-hard fans of The Dark Eye, which is a popular German tabletop franchise. You can find it on PC only, if you want to check it out for some reason. At number 7 is a game that suffered from a very poor launch state, which ultimately got on this list. Remodeled Broken Porcelain isn't a much better game today either though. While its game-breaking bugs have been fixed, its clunky mechanics, terrible combat and just overall awful gameplay truly tell the story about this horror game. The critics are split on the story, some calling it a mess while others praising its narrative values. The game has found a few fans though, and has gotten better with many patches that followed its release. But it keeps its place on this list as a good example of a game that has undergone troubled and rushed development. Another horror game that gets a place on this list is Curse of Annabelle, a poorly designed game that lasts just 2 hours and is full of cliches and no true scares. It markets itself as a story-driven game, but its story is very shallow and sometimes boring, which is one of the bigger sins it commits. Not truly awful, but not something you would want to play, even if you're huge into horror games. Fast and Furious Crossroads is the next entry in the list, and with it we enter the zone of truly awful games. A prime example of a quick cash grab profiting from a name of a popular franchise. For the price of a full-price game, you get a 4 hours long game that's completely broken on PC. A driving game with 2009 graphics and awful driving and physics. It's a game that no one could enjoy, unironically. It truly feels like a game that nobody wanted to make, nobody wanted to play, and nobody wanted to see. A complete failure in every sense of the word. It also has a multiplayer mode, and you may have guessed, it's also awful. Thankfully, nobody's playing it, so it's a ghost town as well. Not every passion project works out, quite like you'd want it to. Dawn of Fear is yet another horror game that takes its place on this list. It's a homage to classic Resident Evil games. It's a nice idea and we haven't seen a game like it for quite some time. But I regret to inform you that it just has too many issues to be a good game. Its biggest sin is that it's riddled with game-breaking bugs and it's a complete technical failure. This game is also a pretty good reminder of why classic Resident Evil games didn't age as well. The game suffers from poor controls, bad level design and uneventful gameplay. It tries really hard but fails in most aspects. This game might actually have some potential to become a mediocre title, but for now it just has way too many issues to even be playable. As it is, you can get it on PC or PlayStation 4 or 5. Probably the most anticipated title of those on this list finds itself at number 3. It's Bounty Battle. A very interesting idea, a brawler similar to Smash Bros, featuring different characters from many different indie titles. Unfortunately, it feels really disappointing. It has the clunkiest, least pretty and also slowest combat I've seen yet in games in this category. The animations are truly awful. The moves are pretty slow and the CPU AI doesn't work at times. It's also extremely unbalanced, especially when playing against AIs, which you can mostly beat by just spamming one move all the time, even at hardest difficulties. The level design is extremely boring, mostly consisting of flat surfaces that do or don't float in the air. It's an outright waste of all those fun characters too, as it really struggles imitating why any of them are as cool as they are. It is a brilliant idea that was probably just way too much to handle for the small team making the game. You can get much more enjoyment of any other free brawler than with this crap. If it gets better, you can get it on all platforms. At number 2 we have Tiny Racer, a Switch exclusive that other platforms are probably quite happy about not having access to. It's a cartoony racing game that both looks and feels like a Flash game made in 2 weeks tops. Its appeal is supposed to be racing with toy cars, a charming idea that I could see working well if executed properly. Unfortunately, it's absolutely horrible. The sound of these toy cars is extremely annoying, as are the physics that feel super bouncy. The tracks are extremely short and it feels pretty unfun to play. This is all without mentioning the controls, crazy AI and bugs. It's a game that nobody can enjoy and it has the lowest Metacritic score in the whole of 2020, 29 out of 100. The next game on the list is a little more insulting than harmless toy cars. And it is the worst game of the year, committing the biggest sin that a game can make itself much worse than the original product. 13 is in fact a remake of a classic made in 2003. Somehow, this game both plays, looks and runs much worse than the original. It is truly hard to describe just how bad this game feels. Not one part of this game works properly, not the gunplay, not stealth, not the AI. It's a technical mess, and it fails massively as a remake, and it also fails significantly as a game in general. It's one of the most awful and unplayable experiences of the year, and it's mind-boggling how it even ended up as a released product. That's it for this list. Happy New Year! Hopefully it's as good for gaming as the last one, and much better in general than 2020. Thanks for watching, make sure to leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for similar content.